Breaking news today. The Russian aristocracy is losing hope in Putin's victory. Even the most optimistic among Russia's elite see a frozen conflict as the best outcome now for the Kremlin, and this pessimistic outlook has spread throughout the country. 7 people familiar with the situation who asked not to be named discussed how many in the political and business elite are tired of the war and want it to end, but they doubt Putin will stop the fighting. Although no one is willing to publicly oppose the president because of the invasion, 4 of those surveyed expressed doubts about his ability to lead effectively. The best-case scenario, according to 2 of the sources, would be for Putin to declare a Pyrrhic victory to the Russian people by holding on to some of the seized Ukrainian territory as a result of negotiations later in the year. There is elite deadlock. They are afraid to become scapegoats for a meaningless war, said Kirill Rogov, former government advisor to the Russian government who fled the country after the invasion and is now the director of Russia, a Vienna-based think tank. As one Russian official put it, it is really surprising how widespread the idea became among the Russian elite that there is a chance that Putin won't win this war. The growing hopelessness is likely to exacerbate public divisions between nationalist hardliners and Russia's defense ministry over who is to blame for the faltering invasion. After a winter in which Moscow's forces made little progress and suffered huge casualties, expectations among Russian officials are low for any significant advances on the battlefield against a Ukrainian counteroffensive backed by billions of weapons from the US and Europe. Parts of the conflict zone were flooded after a massive dam in Ukraine collapsed on Tuesday, which the government in Kyiv blamed on Russia. Russia has denied any wrongdoing. Attacks inside Russia, such as the largest drone strikes targeting Moscow since the war began last week, contribute to a growing sense of insecurity. Putin's reputation as Russia's security guarantee is being tested now that fighting has spread into the Belgorod region bordering Ukraine. Russia's war with Ukraine, which was supposed to end within days but is now in its 16th month, has demoralized even those who support the invasion and want to step up the fight. Yevgeny Prigozhin, founder of the Wagner mercenary group, and his nationalist followers have been fuming at Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Russia's army chief Valery Gerasimov for military failures, calling instead for a massive mobilization and martial law to prevent a disastrous loss. There have been too many big mistakes, said Sergei Markov, a political consultant with ties to the Kremlin. Long ago, it was thought that Russia would eventually take control of the majority of Ukraine, but this never happened. Putin and his top officials are confident Russia will emerge victorious from this conflict, despite the fact that the parameters of victory have shifted since Russia's initial failure to take Kyiv. There appears to be no internal opposition to his leadership. According to 4 sources familiar with the situation, the elite are keeping their heads down and carrying on with their work because they are convinced they have no impact on events. According to 5 sources, Putin has shown no signs of wanting to end the war. Although Putin started the unprovoked invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, state media has been pushing the narrative that Russia is fighting a proxy war there against the United States and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's allies in order to justify repeated losses. The Kremlin has instituted its harshest repression in decades in an effort to put even the most mild forms of dissent in prison. The middle class in Russia, which had been the backbone of the opposition to Putin's rule in major cities over the past decade, has either been silenced or has fled the country in the largest wave of emigration since the Soviet Union's collapse in the 1990s. Polls show that the majority of regular Russians still support Putin, despite his attempts to appeal to Soviet-era nostalgia and Russia's imperial past in order to justify Russia's annexation of parts of eastern and southern Ukraine. However, fears may be rising once more after Putin's announcement of a draft of 300,000 reservists last fall. The FOM polling firm surveyed 1,500 Russians between May 19 and 21, and 53% of those respondents said they thought their friends and family were anxious at the time. This was an increase of 11% from April and the highest reading in nearly 4 months. Last week, Prigozhin toured Russian cities while advocating for martial law and full mobilization, warning of a difficult war that could last for years. In an interview late last month, he warned that the growing gap between the Kremlin elite and ordinary Russians, whose children come back in zinc coffins from Ukraine, posed a threat of a revolution on par with that of 1917. After senior State Duma lawmaker Konstantin Zachelin stated in a forum that the invasion had accomplished none of its declared aims, the ruling United Russia Party reportedly launched an investigation on Monday, as reported by Vedomosti. Let's get out of this somehow, Zachelin suggested. Orthodox nationalist and Putin supporter Konstantin Malofeev argues that Russia should keep fighting because the Ukrainian state should cease to exist. Despite saying that a huge number of business people and other members of the ruling elite would support China's recent peace initiative, which calls for a ceasefire, he is opposed to any such talks. They say they support the special military operation, but in reality they're against it, said Malofeev, a multi-millionaire who is also the sponsor of a volunteer force fighting in Ukraine. With our superior ammunition and shell production, we will be ready to launch an offensive in 6 months. It's true that Russia still has a lot of fighting power. Russian missiles and drones have been raining down on Ukraine for the past month, and Ukrainian air defenses have been kept busy protecting their front lines in the east and south. As it launches its counteroffensive, which has been months in the making, Ukraine has ruled out a resolution to the conflict that leaves Russia occupying any of its territory. Ukrainian Commodore Valery Zaluzhny said on May 27 via Telegram, "It's time to take back what's ours." Putin is pressuring businesses to back the war effort and banning those around him from leaving their posts, so Russian officials and billionaire tycoons know they face potentially years of international isolation and deepening dependence on the Kremlin. Only on geosavin.com can you hear the newest music. US and European sanctions have made Russia's economy one of the world's most sanctioned, upending decades of integration into global markets. Sanctions against them and their families include asset freezes and travel bans. Officials have adapted to the situation, but no one sees any light at the end of the tunnel. They're pessimistic about the future, said Alexandra Prokopenko, a former Russian journalist and central bank advisor who is now a non-resident scholar at the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center in Berlin. Their best-case scenario is a loss for Russia without public shame.